What if the most compassionate act of your life was based on a lie? Imagine finding a man bleeding out in an alley. A man with eyes as dark and dangerous as the city night. You take him in, you clean his wounds, you save his life. You start to fall for the mysterious stranger, recovering on your couch, drawn to his quiet intensity, and the protective way he looks at you. But the man you saved isn't a victim. He's a predator. He's the hidden king of the city's underworld, the don of the Moretti crime family. And his accidental injury. It was a meticulously crafted performance, with one goal to get your attention. He didn't just stumble into your life. He orchestrated an invasion. The question is, when you save a monster, do you become his possession? The rain over Greenwich Village had a specific kind of melancholy. It wasn't the furious, sky-tearing downpour of summer, but a persistent, soul-dampening drizzle that turned the cobblestone streets into slick black mirrors reflecting the moody glow of street lamps. For Serafina Serrarici, it was the kind of weather that made her tiny fourth-floor walk-up feel more like a sanctuary and less like a glorified closet. She was an artist, or at least that's what she told herself as she sketched charcoal portraits of tired commuters on the subway. In reality, she was a barista at a perpetually busy cafe on Bleecker Street, a job that paid her rent and fueled her caffeine addiction, but did little for her soul. Her life was a predictable rhythm of steam wands, charcoal dust, and the lonely echo of her own footsteps. Tonight, that rhythm was about to be shattered. Her shift had ended late, and the usual walk home felt different. The air was heavier, the shadows in the narrow alley she used as a shortcut deeper and more menacing. It was a stupid risk. She knew it. Her friend Chloe, a pragmatic paralegal, was always telling her, "Sarah, this isn't a 1940s film noir. Take the main street." But the alley cut 5 minutes off her walk, and her feet ached. Halfway through, a sound snagged her attention. A low groan, thick and wet, that was almost lost beneath the patter of the rain. It wasn't the usual city noise of a drunkard or a stray cat. This was the sound of pure, unadulterated pain. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, to run, to blend back into the relative safety of the lit street. But another deeper instinct, the one that made her leave seeds out for pigeons and give her last dollar to a shivering man on the corner, pushed her forward. She saw him then. A heap of darkness against the grimy brick wall, slumped beside a overflowing dumpster. He was a large man, dressed in a bespoke suit that was now soaked through with rain, and something terrifyingly darker. She moved closer, her phone's flashlight cutting a nervous beam through the gloom. The light fell across his face and she gasped. He was brutally handsome, even with his features contorted in agony. A sharp jawline, a strong Roman nose, and a spill of jet-black hair plastered to his forehead. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow. The dark stain wasn't just on his suit. It was blooming from a wound high on his side, a visceral, horrifying crimson. "Hey," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Hey, can you hear me? I'm calling an ambulance." She fumbled for her phone again, her fingers slick with rain, but a hand shot out and gripped her wrist. It was surprisingly strong. His eyes fluttered open, and for a second, the world tilted on its axis. They weren't just dark. They were voids of obsidian, intense and commanding, even in his weakened state. No, he rasped, his voice a low gravel. No. Hospital. No police. Sarah froze. This was the part in the movie where the sensible girl runs. But looking at him, at the raw vulnerability warring with the steel in his gaze, she couldn't. He was bleeding out in her alley. "You're going to die," she said, her voice firmer than she felt. "You've been shot." A faint, humorless smile touched his lips, observant. He coughed a racking sound that made him clutch his side. "Please, just help me, get me out of the rain." Panic and compassion waged a war inside her. Bringing a gunshot victim into her home was insane. It was inviting a world of trouble she couldn't possibly comprehend. He could be a criminal, a murderer. But leaving him here to die felt equally monstrous. She looked into his eyes again, and the decision was made. There was desperation there, but also a flicker of something else, a silent plea that went beyond the wound. "Okay." She breathed the word, sealing her fate. "Okay. But you have to help me. I can't carry you." He nodded, gritting his teeth. With her arm hooked under his, and his own massive arm slung over her shoulders, they began the agonizingly slow journey out of the alley. He was heavy, a dead weight of muscle and pain, and every step was a testament to his sheer willpower. He leaned on her, his breath hot against her ear, the scent of rain, expensive cologne, and blood filling her senses. Getting him up the 4 flights of stairs to her apartment was a Herculean task that left her gasping and her muscles screaming in protest. By the time she finally managed to get him through her door and onto her worn velvet sofa, they were both drenched and she was trembling from adrenaline. He collapsed against the cushions, his face pale and beaded with sweat. The reality of the situation crashed down on her. A bleeding gunshot man was on her couch. "What's your name?" she asked, stripping off her wet jacket. He watched her through half-lidded eyes, his gaze unnervingly focused. "Alex," he said. "Just Alex." "Okay, Alex," she said, taking a deep breath and channeling a practicality she didn't know she possessed. "I have a first aid kit, a good one. I used to volunteer at an animal shelter, so I'm not squeamish. But I'm not a doctor. I need you to tell me what to do." For the first time, a genuine, if faint, smile touched his lips. It transformed his face, hinting at a devastating charm hidden beneath the pain. "An animal shelter," he murmured almost to himself. "Of course." Then his voice became businesslike. The bullet went through. "Clean exit. You need to stop the bleeding and disinfect it. Anything. To sterilize strong liquor." Sarah's mind raced. "I have a bottle of Kettle One vodka someone gave me for Christmas." "Perfect," he said, his eyes closing for a moment. "And something to bite down on." The next hour was a surreal, nightmarish blur. Sarah worked with a concentration born of terror, her small living room transformed into a makeshift operating theater. She cut away the fine fabric of his Tom Ford suit, revealing a torso sculpted like a Renaissance statue, now marred by the ugly wound. She poured the expensive vodka over the injury, earning a guttural cry of pain that he muffled into a throw pillow. Her hands, usually so steady when holding a piece of charcoal, shook as she packed the wound with gauze and wrapped his ribs tightly with bandages from her kit. Throughout it all, he never screamed again. He just watched her. His intense, unwavering gaze followed her every move, making her feel both unnerved and, strangely, safe. It was a bizarre contradiction. Here she was tending to a man who was the very definition of danger, yet his presence was a strange anchor in the storm he had created in her life. When she was finally done, she sank onto the floor, exhausted. He was pale, but his breathing was more even. "Thank you," he said, his voice quiet. "Don't thank me yet," she replied, running a hand through her damp hair. "You've bled all over my grandmother's sofa." He chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. "I'll buy you a new one." 100 new ones. Sarah looked at him. Really looked at him. The expensive, ruined suit. A watch on his wrist that even to her untrained eye looked like it cost more than her entire apartment, a Patek Philippe perhaps, the calm authority in his voice. He wasn't just some street thug caught in a crossfire. "Who are you, Alex?" she asked softly. His dark eyes met hers, and the charm was gone, replaced by an unreadable, guarded expression. "I'm just a man who owes you his life, Serafina." She flinched. She hadn't told him her name. He saw the fear in her eyes, and his expression softened slightly. "It's on your mail," he said, nodding towards a small pile of letters on her coffee table. Serafina Ricci. It's a beautiful name. An angel's name. She didn't know what to say. The man was a mystery, wrapped in danger, and he was currently passed out on her couch. As she stood up to get a blanket, she caught sight of her reflection in the dark window pane. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. The predictable rhythm of her life was gone, and she had the terrifying feeling that she would never get it back. The first light of dawn crept through the large arched window of Serafina's apartment, painting stripes of grey across the floorboards. She hadn't slept. Instead, she'd spent the night in her rickety armchair, watching the stranger on her couch, a mug of cold tea clutched in her hands. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every creak of the old building a potential enemy. Alex, as he called himself, slept deeply, a sleep born of trauma and exhaustion. In repose he looked younger, the harsh lines of his face softened. Without the pain and the guarded intensity, he was just a man. A dangerously attractive, impossibly built man. But a man nonetheless. Sarah allowed her artist's eye to trace the contours of his face, the high cheekbones, the stubborn set of his jaw, the dark slash of his eyebrows. He was the kind of subject painters dreamed of, a study in contradictions, beauty and brutality, strength and vulnerability. When he finally stirred, it wasn't with a groan, but with a sudden stillness. His eyes snapped open, instantly alert, and scanned the room before they landed on her. The obsidian gaze was back, sharp and analytical. "Morning," she said, her voice hoarse. "You stayed up." He stated it wasn't a question. He tried to sit up, wincing as the movement pulled at his bandaged side. "Don't," she commanded, rushing to his side. "You'll tear the stitches, the bandages. You need to rest." He settled back against the cushions, his eyes never leaving her face. "You have questions." "I have a million," she admitted, moving back to the safety of her chair. "Like who shot you and why you can't go to a hospital, and how you knew my name before you saw my mail." The last part was a lie. He had explained the mail. But she wanted to see his reaction. A flicker of something unreadable passed through his eyes before his expression smoothed over. "My line of work. It has its rivals," he said, the answer vague and practiced. "Hospitals and police create records complications. As for your name," he gave that small, disarming smile again. "Maybe I'm just very observant." It was a deflection, not an answer, but Sarah didn't press. She was too tired and frankly too scared. For the next 3 days, an unspoken truce settled between them. Her apartment, her sanctuary, became his sick bay. The world outside ceased to exist. Their universe shrank to the confines of her living room. Sarah worked from home, calling in sick to the cafe. She sketched the charcoal seeming to move on its own as she filled page after page with his likeness. She made him broth, changed his bandages, and found herself talking to him in a way she rarely did with anyone. She told him about her dream of having her own gallery, show the frustration of her creative blocks, the memory of her mother teaching her how to mix paints. Alex, in turn, was a master of listening. He'd watch her with that unnerving focus, asking questions that deftly steered the conversation away from himself and back to her. He learned that her favorite color was the deep, velvety blue of a twilight sky, that she found solace in the scent of old books, and that she felt more at home in the quiet halls of the Met than anywhere else on earth. He was a perfect patient, never complaining, his stoicism almost unnatural. But there were glimpses of the man beneath the mystery. One afternoon, he saw her struggling with a large, stretched canvas. Ignoring her protests, he stood hissing in pain and lifted it with one arm, placing it perfectly on her easel. The sheer, effortless strength was startling. Another time she found him looking at one of her charcoal portraits, a sketch of an old woman with kind, wrinkled eyes who sold flowers near Washington Square Park. "You capture more than just her face," he said quietly, his voice laced with an emotion she couldn't place. "You capture her story." Coming from him, the praise felt like a physical touch. It warmed her in a way no empty compliment ever had. She was beginning to see the man she wanted to see, not the dangerous enigma who had bled on her floor. She was drawn to the quiet intelligence in his eyes, the low timbre of his voice, the surprising gentleness he showed her. The fear was still there, a low hum beneath the surface, but it was being drowned out by a dangerous, intoxicating fascination. On the third night, his fever broke. She found him standing by the window, staring down at the glistening street below. He had put on a spare t-shirt and sweatpants she'd bought for him, and the casual clothes were a strange contrast to his powerful aura. "You should be in bed," she said softly. He turned, and the look on his face was different. The pain was gone, replaced by an intensity that made her breath catch. "I can't stay here, Serafina. I'm putting you in danger." "You don't even know that," she argued weakly. "I know," he said, and the certainty in his voice chilled her. He took a step closer. "Thank you. For everything. Where will you go?" "I have a place. People." He reached into the pocket of the ruined trousers folded neatly on a chair and pulled out a thick roll of cash. He tried to hand it to her. "For the sofa. For your trouble." Sarah stared at the money, insulted. "I didn't do it for money, Alex." "I know," he said, his voice softer now. "But let me do this. Let me help you." "I don't need your help." He looked around her small apartment, his gaze lingering on the patched-up armchair, the stack of unpaid bills on her desk she'd tried to hide. His look wasn't pitying, it was assessing. "Everyone needs help," he said. He took her hand, not to give her the money, but to simply hold it. His fingers were warm and strong around hers. "Let me take you to dinner tomorrow night, to thank you properly." She should have said no. She should have let him walk out of her life and bolted the door behind him. But the thought of her apartment returning to its silent, empty state was suddenly unbearable. "Okay," she heard herself say. He smiled, a full, genuine smile this time, and it lit up his entire face. It was devastating. "I'll have a car pick you up at 8. Dress for St. Ambrose." He left before she could ask what that was. The roll of cash was sitting on her coffee table. It was more money than she made in 6 months at the cafe. After he was gone, the silence he left behind was deafening. Her apartment felt empty, her life suddenly muted and colorless. She had spent 3 days with a storm raging in her living room, and now she was left with the unsettling calm of its aftermath. The next day, she found an anonymous email from a prestigious gallery in Soho, the Castelli Gallery. The owner, a Mr. Silas Blackwood, had seen her online portfolio, a portfolio she hadn't updated in years, and was extremely interested in her work. He wanted to set up a meeting. It was the breakthrough she had been dreaming of for years. The timing was too perfect, too coincidental. It had to be him, Alex. He wasn't just a man with dangerous rivals. He was a man with influence, the kind of power that could open doors with a single phone call. That night, as she got ready for their date, she felt a thrill of both excitement and unease. She used some of the money he'd left to buy a simple but elegant black dress from a boutique she'd only ever window shopped at. When she looked in the mirror, she saw a different woman. Her eyes were brighter, her expression less tired. She looked like a woman on the verge of something extraordinary, or something catastrophic. At 8 o'clock sharp, a sleek black Mercedes Maybach pulled up to her building. The driver, a stoic man in a black suit, opened the door for her without a word. As she slid into the buttery leather interior, she realized she was no longer in her world. She was entering his, and she had a sinking feeling that this gilded cage, as beautiful as it was, might not have an open door. Saint-Ambroise on Lafayette Street was less a restaurant and more a theater of power. The air hummed with the quiet, confident murmur of old money and new influence. Women in designer dresses and dripping with understated jewels picked at their risotto, while men in tailored suits conducted business over glasses of Barolo. When Sarah walked in, she felt like an imposter. A charcoal sketch in a gallery of oil paintings. But then she saw Alex. He was standing at the bar, and the crowd seemed to part for him, creating an invisible circle of deference. He wasn't the wounded man from her couch anymore. He wore a perfectly fitted navy blue suit, a crisp white shirt, unbuttoned at the collar, and the Patek Philippe watch she'd noticed before. He looked like he owned the place. He probably did. When he saw her, his intense gaze swept over her, and the appreciative smile that touched his lips made her feel like the only woman in the room. "Serafina," he said, his voice a low caress, as he took her hand and brushed his lips against her knuckles. "You look breathtaking." The simple old-world gesture sent a shiver down her spine. The maitre d' appeared as if summoned, bowing slightly. "Mr. Moretti, your table is ready." Moretti. The name registered in the back of Sarah's mind, but the whirlwind of the evening swept it away before it could take root. He led her to the best table in the house, a secluded corner booth that offered a view of the entire restaurant, but was itself shielded from prying eyes. "Is Alex your first name or your middle name?" she asked, trying to make small talk, as a waiter poured them champagne from a bottle that looked older than she was. "It's Alessandro," he replied smoothly, "but I prefer Alex." The conversation flowed easily, more easily than it had in her apartment. He was charming, witty, and utterly captivating. He spoke of art with a knowledge that surprised her, discussing the chiaroscuro of Caravaggio and the raw emotion of Rothko. He asked about her meeting with the Castelli Gallery, and when she looked at him with a knowing, suspicious gaze, he simply raised an eyebrow. "A talented artist should have her work seen," he said, the picture of innocence. "Silas is an old acquaintance. I merely made an introduction." "An introduction?" Sarah laughed, a little breathless. "Alex, people wait their entire lives for an introduction to Silas Blackwood." "Then they don't have the right friends," he said, his expression serious. "I want to be the right friend for you, Sarah." There was a weight to his words, a possessiveness that was both thrilling and terrifying. Over dinner, perfectly seared scallops and a truffle pasta that tasted like heaven, she started to see the other side of him. The way other diners would look at their table, then quickly look away. The way the staff seemed to anticipate his every need before he voiced it. Power radiated from him, an invisible, palpable force. Once a man in a pinstripe suit approached their table, his face florid and sweating. "Mr. Moretti, a word, if I may." Alex didn't even look at him. His eyes remained fixed on Sarah. "I'm having dinner, Antonio. We can discuss your shipping container issues tomorrow." The man Antonio paled and practically bowed before scurrying away. Alex turned his attention back to Sarah, as if nothing had happened. "Shipping container issues?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "I own an import-export business," he said with an easy shrug. "Moretti Global. We move goods all over the world." It sounded legitimate, plausible. But it didn't explain the gunshot wound or the fear in Antonio's eyes. Red flags were waving frantically in her mind, but her heart was choosing to ignore them, blinded by the champagne, the luxurious surroundings, and the magnetic pull of the man in front of her. After dinner, he didn't take her home. Instead, the Maybach purred its way uptown, stopping in front of a grand pre-war building overlooking Gramercy Park, the city's most exclusive private garden. "What are we doing here?" she asked. "I have something to show you," he said, leading her inside. A doorman tipped his hat respectfully. They rode a private elevator, its brass cage gleaming up to the penthouse. The apartment was staggering. It occupied the entire top floor with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic, godlike view of the glittering Manhattan skyline. The space was minimalist and masculine, decorated in shades of charcoal, black, and cream, with a few carefully chosen pieces of modern art on the walls, a real Basquiat hung over the marble fireplace. "This is your home," she whispered, awestruck. "It's one of them," he said, walking over to a vast wall of glass that overlooked the park. He pulled a small, ornate key from his pocket. "Every resident of this building gets a key to the park. It's a quiet place. Peaceful." He held the key out to her. "I want you to have one." Sarah stared at the key in his palm. It was more than a key. It was an invitation into his world, a world of privilege and power she couldn't imagine. It was also a gilded chain. "Alex, this is too much," she stammered. "The dinner, the gallery, now this. I don't understand." He stepped closer, closing the distance between them. He smelled of champagne and something uniquely his, a clean, masculine scent that made her dizzy. He gently tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers warm against her skin. "I told you," he said, his voice a low murmur. "I want to help you. I want to give you everything you deserve. A studio where you don't have to worry about the rent. The freedom to create without having to steam milk for ungrateful bankers. All I ask in return," he paused, his thumb stroking her cheekbone, "is your time, your company. Let me be a part of your life, Serafina." It was a devil's bargain wrapped in velvet and silk. He was offering her dreams on a silver platter, but the price was tying herself to him, to the danger and secrets that swirled around him like a bespoke suit. She knew she should say no, that she should run back to her tiny apartment and her simple, safe life. But when he leaned in, and his lips finally met hers, all rational thought evaporated. The kiss wasn't gentle. It was possessive, demanding a brand of ownership. It was a kiss that spoke of obsession and a long-held hunger. It consumed her, lighting a fire in her veins that burned away all the warnings, all the red flags. She kissed him back with a desperation that surprised them both, her hands tangling in his dark hair, pulling him closer. In that moment, wrapped in his arms with the city lights blazing like a galaxy at her feet, she felt an intoxicating sense of belonging. She ignored the small, terrified voice in her head that was screaming that this wasn't a fairy tale. This was a myth, the one about the girl who falls in love with the king of the underworld, and she never gets to leave. The weeks that followed were a dizzying blur of opulence and art. Alex kept his word. A week after their first date, the lease for a sun-drenched, sprawling loft in Soho landed in her hands. It was a dream studio with high ceilings, exposed brick, and a northern-facing wall of windows that bathed the space in the perfect soft light for painting. The first and last year's rent was already paid. Sarah quit her job at the cafe without a second thought. She threw herself into her art with a fervor she hadn't felt in years. The creative block that had plagued her crumbled, and canvases began to fill with color and life. Her meeting with Silas Blackwood had been a resounding success. He'd been captivated by her charcoal portraits and commissioned a series of 6 large-scale oil paintings for an upcoming group exhibition. Her dream was no longer a distant fantasy. It was her reality. And Alex was the architect of it all. He was a constant, commanding presence in her new life. He would appear at her studio unannounced, bringing takeout from Per Se, or simply watching her work for hours, his intense gaze a silent, unnerving form of encouragement. He took her to black-tie galas at the MoMA, to private boxes at the opera, to weekend trips to the Hamptons on his yacht. He showered her with gifts, a delicate Cartier bracelet, first-edition art books, a vintage set of sable brushes she'd only ever dreamed of owning. Sarah was living in a fairy tale, but even in fairy tales there are dark forests. The edges of Alex's world were sharp and dangerous, and occasionally she would prick her finger on them. She saw the deference he commanded everywhere, the way men twice his age would fall silent when he entered a room, the way a reservation at a restaurant that was booked for months would magically open up. He called it respect. She was beginning to see it as fear. His phone would ring at odd hours, and he would walk away to take the call. His voice dropping to a low, menacing tone, often speaking in rapid, angry Italian. When he returned, his mood would be dark, a thundercloud behind his eyes that he tried to shield from her. The first real crack appeared on a Tuesday. Sarah was working late in her studio, lost in the vibrant reds and golds of a new canvas, when a man she'd never seen before let himself in with a key. He was tall and lean, with slicked-back hair and the cold, watchful eyes of a hawk. He introduced himself as Marco Bianchi, Alex's head of security. "Mr. Moretti sent me," Marco said, his voice smooth but devoid of warmth. "He wants me to stay with you until he arrives. There was an incident downtown." "An incident? What happened? Is he okay?" Sarah's heart leaped into her throat. "He's fine," Marco said dismissively. "Just some business that needed attending to. He's concerned for your safety." Concerned? Why would he be concerned for her safety? An hour later, Alex arrived. He looked tired, and there was a fresh, angry-looking cut on his cheekbone that he hadn't bothered to hide. But what truly frightened her was the small, dark stain on the cuff of his white shirt. It looked like blood. "Alex, what's going on?" she demanded, her voice shaking as she pointed to his cuff. He glanced down, his expression unreadable. "It's nothing. A business deal went sour. Some people don't like to negotiate fairly." He reached out to touch her face, but she flinched away. "Who are you, Alex?" She whispered the question she'd been too scared to ask, hanging between them. "An import-export businessman doesn't come home with blood on his shirt and a bodyguard in tow." He sighed, a heavy, weary sound. He finally looked her in the eye, and for the first time he didn't try to hide the darkness there. "My business is complicated, Sarah," he said, his voice low and grave. "I have competitors, vicious ones. Sometimes they don't play by the rules. What happened today was a message sent from a rival. Dmitry Volkov. He's new to the city, reckless. He wants what I have." Dmitry Volkov. The name sounded foreign, brutal. "And what do you have?" She pressed her fear, making her bold. "Shipping containers." A humorless smile twisted his lips. "Among other things. I have control of the ports. I have influence. I have power. And now," he said, stepping closer and cupping her face in his hands, his touch gentle despite the tension in the room. "He knows that I have you. And that makes you a target." The air left her lungs. It was one thing to suspect he was dangerous. It was another to be told that his danger could splash onto her. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that you're not safe on your own anymore," he said, his voice hardening. "Marco or one of my other men will be with you whenever I'm not. They'll be discreet. You'll barely know they're there." A cold dread washed over her. The gilded cage was closing. The key to Gramercy Park wasn't a gift. It was for a prison. She said, shaking her head. "I can't live like that. I won't be your prisoner." "It's not about being a prisoner." He snapped, his voice rising for the first time. The raw power in it made the air crackle. He caught himself taking a deep breath. "It's about keeping you alive. Do you understand me, Serafina? This man Volkov, he would hurt you just to watch me burn. I will not let that happen." He pulled her against him, his arms wrapping around her like steel bands. He buried his face in her hair, and she could feel the tension thrumming through his body. "I won't let anything happen to you," he murmured, his voice thick with a desperate, terrifying sincerity. "I would tear this city apart first." She should have fought him. She should have screamed and run and never looked back, but pressed against his chest, feeling the frantic beat of his heart against her cheek. All she felt was a profound and paralyzing fear, and underneath it, a shameful, thrilling flicker of security. The monster was hers, and he would protect her. She didn't know then that the real threat wasn't Dmitry Volkov. It was the man holding her. It was the web of lies he had spun around her from the very beginning. And it was about to unravel in the most devastating way possible. Life with a shadow was unnerving. Marco, or another grim-faced man in a dark suit, was always there. Parked across the street from her studio. Sitting a few tables away at a coffee shop. A discreet, constant reminder of the dangerous world Alex inhabited. Sarah tried to ignore it, to lose herself in her painting, but a persistent unease had taken root in her heart. Alex's partial confession had only created more questions. His vagueness, a shroud over a truth she was beginning to suspect was far darker than she could imagine. The paranoia started to creep in. She began looking over her shoulder on the street, her heart jumping at every loud noise. The city she loved, once a source of inspiration, now felt like a hunting ground. Her art suffered. The vibrant colors on her canvases became muddied, her brushstrokes hesitant. She was living in a state of suspended fear, and it was suffocating her. Her suspicion festered, turning into a desperate need for answers. Who was Alessandro Moretti, really? The name felt significant, tickling the edges of her memory. One sleepless night, fueled by caffeine and anxiety, she sat down at her laptop. Her hands trembled as she typed Alessandro Moretti, New York, into the search bar. The results hit her like a physical blow. There were articles from Forbes and the Wall Street Journal about Moretti Global Imports, praising its enigmatic CEO for his aggressive expansion and philanthropy. There were glossy photos of him at charity balls, shaking hands with senators and celebrities. This was the public face of Alex. But as she dug deeper using more specific search terms, Moretti family, New York organized crime, port control. A different horrifying picture emerged. She found articles from crime blogs and archived news reports from the New York Post. They spoke of the Moretti crime family, one of the city's oldest and most powerful syndicates. They spoke of a bloody war of succession 5 years ago, after the old Don Enzo Moretti died of a heart attack. They spoke of his youngest son, Alessandro, a man with a genius intellect and a ruthless reputation, who had seized control, consolidated power, and dragged the family into a new era of legitimacy, all while maintaining an iron grip on the city's underworld. He wasn't in the Mafia. He was the boss. The Don. Mr. Moretti. Sarah felt sick. The room seemed to spin the words on the screen, blurring together. The man who listened to her talk about her dreams. The man who kissed her with such possessive tenderness. The man who claimed he would tear the city apart for her. He was a killer. A gangster. His fortune was built on extortion, violence, and fear. Her beautiful studio, her gallery show, her entire new life was financed by blood money. She stumbled away from the laptop, gasping for air. Every moment they had spent together replayed in her mind, now tainted by this monstrous truth. His refusal of a hospital, his business rivals, the fear in Antonio's eyes at the restaurant. It all clicked into place, forming a hideous mosaic. But the worst was yet to come. As she scrolled through the search results with a morbid, self-destructive curiosity, she found a small, almost forgotten article from a local Queens newspaper, dated just over 2 months ago. The headline read, "Minor gang scuffle in Greenwich Village alley leaves 1 injured." Her blood ran cold. She clicked the link. The article was short, citing an anonymous police source. It detailed a brief, non-fatal altercation between 2 unknown parties in an alley off Bleecker Street. There were no arrests, but residents reported hearing a single gunshot. The most chilling part was a quote from an unnamed witness who claimed to have seen the victim being helped away by a young woman. The date of the article matched the night she had found Alex. A minor gang scuffle. The words echoed in her brain. It wasn't an assassination attempt. It wasn't a targeted hit by a rival. It was a scuffle. But Alex was the most powerful crime boss in the city. Men like him weren't involved in minor scuffles. They didn't get caught in random crossfire. A new, even more sickening thought began to form in her mind, a suspicion so audacious and manipulative that she initially dismissed it as impossible. She started a new search, cross-referencing names from the crime blogs. She found a low-level enforcer for the Moretti family named Luca Rossi, a man known for being utterly loyal to Alessandro. Then she searched for him in connection to the date of the shooting, and she found it. A single line in a police blotter noting that Luca Rossi had been treated at a private, discreet clinic uptown for a powder burn on his hand on that exact same night. He'd fired a gun. The pieces slammed together with brutal, devastating clarity. It wasn't random. It wasn't an attack. It was a performance. A carefully staged, meticulously executed play designed for an audience of one. Her. Alex hadn't stumbled into her life. He hadn't needed saving. He had his men watch her, learned her routine, and then orchestrated the entire event. He had himself shot, or had a blank fired, or a superficial wound inflicted in the alley he knew she would walk through. He had engineered his own vulnerability to prey on her compassion. He hadn't needed an angel of mercy. He had been hunting for one. The betrayal was absolute, a poison that seeped into every memory that she had of him. Their first conversation, her tending to his wound, their talks on her couch, it was all a lie, a calculated psychopathic manipulation to get close to her. Her compassion, the very thing she prided herself on, had been weaponized against her. She thought of his words, "I want to be a part of your life, Serafina." He hadn't wanted to be a part of it. He had wanted to conquer it. A cold, hard fury she had never known she possessed rose up inside her, eclipsing the fear and the heartbreak. She wasn't his weakness. She was his project, a prize to be won through deceit. She looked around the beautiful, sun-drenched studio he had bought for her. It was no longer a dream. It was a cage he had built before he had even captured her. She grabbed her keys and her purse, her movements stiff and robotic. Marco was parked in his usual spot across the street, a silent sentinel. She walked right past him, not even glancing his way, as she hailed a cab. She had to see Alex. She had to see the look on his face when she tore his perfectly constructed world of lies apart. The taxi ride to Alex's penthouse felt like a journey to another planet. The city lights blurred past the window, a smear of indifferent color. Sarah sat rigid in the back seat, her hands clenched into fists in her lap, her fury a cold, hard ball in her stomach. The heartbroken girl who had cried over her laptop was gone, replaced by a woman forged in the fire of betrayal. She didn't need to be announced. The doorman recognized her and simply nodded, his expression impassive as she swept past him into the private elevator. The ascent to the penthouse was a slow, agonizing climb towards a confrontation that would change everything. She found Alex in his living room, standing before the vast window that overlooked the city. He was on the phone, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He turned as she entered, a slow, pleased smile spreading across his face when he saw her. "Sera tesoro. What a surprise," he said into the phone, his eyes still on her. "I have to go." He ended the call and set his glass down, his smile widening as he moved toward her. "I was just about to come to you." He reached for her, intending to pull her into an embrace, but she took a sharp step back as if his touch would burn her. The rejection stopped him cold. The smile vanished from his face, replaced by a look of confusion, then concern. "What is it? What's wrong?" he asked, his dark eyes scanning her face. "Did something happen? Is it Volkov? Volkov," she repeated, her voice dripping with a scorn she didn't know she could produce. "No, Alex, it's not about Dmitry Volkov. It's about you. It's about Don Alessandro Moretti." She spat the name like a curse. The effect was instantaneous. A shutter came down over his eyes, the charming lover disappearing, completely replaced by the cold, calculating crime boss. He didn't flinch, didn't deny it. He simply stood there, watching her, his body utterly still. "You've been busy," he said, his voice flat. "I have," she shot back, her voice rising with hysteria. "I found out all about your import-export business. I read all about your family's bloody history, but that's not the best part of my research, Alessandro. The best part was a little article about a minor gang scuffle in a Greenwich Village alley." She saw it, then a flicker, a tiny, almost imperceptible reaction in his eyes, before the mask of indifference slammed back down. It was all the confirmation she needed. "It was you, wasn't it?" She choked out a raw, ragged sound. "You staged it, all of it. The gunshot bleeding out in the rain. It was all a lie, wasn't it? A sick, twisted show just for me." He didn't answer. He just stared at her, his jaw tight. "Answer me!" she screamed, taking a step forward, her fists now beating a useless, frantic rhythm against his chest. It was like hitting a wall of granite. "You let me think I was saving you. You let me clean your wound. You let me care for you. You let me fall for this pathetic wounded man who never even existed. Why?" He grabbed her wrists, his grip like iron, stilling her frantic assault. He held her there, his face just inches from hers, his obsidian eyes boring into her. "Because it was the only way," he finally said, his voice a low, raw growl. "The only way to get to you. To meet you without the name Moretti walking into the room first. I saw you, Sarah, months ago. You were in Washington Square Park, sketching. You gave your scarf to a homeless woman because she was shivering. You were light in a world full of darkness. You were the only thing that was pure. I had to know you." "Know me," she shrieked, struggling against his grip. "This isn't knowing me. This is stalking. This is deranged. You didn't want to know me. You wanted to own me." "Yes," he roared. The confession ripped from his throat, raw and violent. "I wanted to own you. I wanted to protect you. I wanted to put you in a place where the filth of the world, my world, could never touch you. And I would do it again. I would lie 1,000 times. I would bleed 1,000 times to have those 3 days with you again on that ridiculous, lumpy sofa." His words were a confession of an obsession so profound it terrified her to her core. This wasn't love. It was a madness. "You're a monster," she whispered, the fight draining out of her, leaving only a hollow, echoing emptiness. "I am," he said, his voice softening, his grip on her wrists gentling. "But I would have never been a monster to you." Suddenly, his phone buzzed violently on the table. Then hers rang. They both looked at the caller ID. It was her friend, Chloe. Alex's phone buzzed again, a text message this time. He released Sarah's wrists and snatched it up. His face went white. "Don't answer that," he commanded, his voice tight with a new, terrifying urgency. But it was too late. Sarah, her hand trembling, answered her phone. "Chloe!" There was no reply. Just the sound of a struggle, a muffled cry, and then a new voice on the line. A man's voice, thick with a Russian accent. "Mr. Moretti," the voice said, cold and calm, knowing Alex could hear. "This is Dmitry Volkov. You have something that belongs to my organization. A shipment out of the Red Hook terminal. It seems your men intercepted it. I believe this young lady." There was a sharp cry of pain from Chloe in the background. "And your little artist are fair collateral. You see, I also know how to get a man's attention." Alex snatched the phone from Sarah's hand. Volkov. You touch either of them, and there is no hole on this earth deep enough for you to hide in. Bring my merchandise to the old shipyard at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. Alone. You have 1 hour, the voice on the other end said, or your angel gets her wings clipped, and her friend, too. The line went dead. Sarah stood frozen, the horror of the situation crashing down on her. Chloe. They had Chloe. Because of her, because of Alex's obsession and the dark world he had dragged her into. Alex turned to her, and the man she had been screaming at was gone. In his place was the Don. His eyes were pure black ice, his face a mask of controlled lethal fury. The air in the room dropped 10 degrees. Marco is downstairs, he said, his voice dangerously calm. He will take you to a secure location. You will not argue. No, Sarah cried, grabbing his arm. Chloe is my best friend. This is my fault. This is my fault, he corrected her, his voice absolute. And I will fix it. Now go with Marco. He strode towards the door, already barking orders into his phone in Italian. Sarah realized with a sickening jolt that he was going to walk into a trap. He was going to trade his life for theirs. In that moment of pure terror, the lines blurred. He was a monster, a liar, a manipulator. But he was also the only one who could save her friend. And despite everything, the thought of him dying, of him not coming back from that shipyard, was an agony she couldn't bear. The lie had been monstrous, but the protective instinct she had fallen for was brutally, terrifyingly real. The air in the derelict Brooklyn Navy Yard warehouse was thick with tension. Dmitry Volkov held Sarah and her friend Chloe, captive, a smirk on his face, as Alessandro Moretti entered. A lone figure against the cavernous darkness. You came for her, Volkov taunted. An obsession, a weakness. No, Alex replied, his voice a low promise of violence that echoed in the silence. A reason. It was the signal. Suddenly the warehouse exploded into chaos. Alex's men repelled from the rafters as others swarmed through the bay doors, turning Volkov's trap into a perfectly executed slaughter. Alex moved through the firefight like a phantom, a blur of deadly precision aimed directly at Sarah. Panicked Volkov grabbed her, pressing a gun to her temple. "Stop, or she dies!" he screamed. Alex froze his face, a mask of cold fury. As Volkov prepared to use his advantage, Sarah reacted, stomping her heel down hard on his foot. He roared in pain, his grip faltering for a single instant. It was all Alex needed. He closed the distance, disarming and neutralizing Volkov, with a brutal finality that left no doubt about who ruled the city's underworld. Days later, in her now empty studio, Alex made his final plea. He placed a deed and a burner phone on a crate between them. The deed is to a house in California, he said, his voice raw. A new safe life. You can walk away, and I will never bother you again. The phone has one number. Mine. Call it, and you choose me. You choose all of me, the good and the monstrous. I will never lie to you again. He turned and left her in the silence. Sarah stared at the two objects, at the two futures they represented, a life of guaranteed peace or a life with her dark protector. The choice was hers. And so Serafina stands at a crossroads with two choices before her, each leading to a vastly different future. Does she take the safe path? Flee to a life of quiet solitude in Carmel, forever painting the memory of a love that was both a lie and the truest thing she's ever known? Or does she choose the dangerous, unpredictable path, Does she pick up that phone and call back the monster who worships her, embracing the darkness to be with the man who sets her soul on fire? Her decision will change everything. What would you do? This is where her story pauses, but the conversation is just beginning. Let me know in the comments below which choice you think Sarah should make. Should she run or should she reign beside him? Your opinion matters. If you were captivated by the story of Serafina and Alessandro, please don't forget to hit that like button. Share this video with a friend who loves a dark romance, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss what happens next.